Meyer from ALA 2012. Marissa, what came first, the cyborg or the Cinderella?
The Cinderella came first. I had the idea in my head that I wanted to write a series of futuristic fairy tales, and so I've written up a list of some of my favorite fairy tales and some of my favorite sci-fi tropes, and different ways that they could kind of be mixed up and mashed together. And then Cinderella and Cyborg just kind of collided in my subconscious after that, and the Lunar Chronicles was born.
Now, when did you first encounter cyborgs? Was there a book, a movie, a TV show?
Ooh, I mean, probably Star Wars. I grew up on Star Wars, although I probably didn't know the term cyborg until, I don't know, maybe the Borg in Star Trek?
So you'd call yourself a sci-fi fan then?
You know, it's funny, I never really thought of myself as a big sci-fi fan. I was definitely much more a fantasy girl growing up, but obviously I had the Star Wars background, with my brother is a huge, huge Star Wars fan. And when I was, in my early 20s, I got really hooked on Firefly. And then I also am a big anime fan, and I loved Cowboy Bebop, which is like the space western.
The best credit sequence ever.
I love it. It's so awesome. And there's another cyborg. There's cyborgs in that too. So, I have influences of science fiction. But in general, I don't know that I would really call myself a science fiction fan.
Well, now I have to ask, what are your favorite top 5 anime?
Top 5? Okay. Have to say Sailor Moon, because it was really what got me started in writing. Cowboy Bebop, Rurouni Kenshin. Howl's Moving Castle.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, I'm testing you now.
I know. I don't know. Those are the 5 that really jump out at me as being beyond awesome.
So I guess, is it fair to say that the kind of Asian influence on Cinder came from your love of anime?
It definitely was inspired. And just kind of my fascination with Asian culture in general. But the main reason, the big reason that I chose to set Cinder in futuristic Asia is because I love fairy tales, and I studied fairy tales in college, and I learned at one point that what we think of as our Cinderella story originated in 9th century China. And a lot of scholars think that the whole glass slipper and, fitting the smallest foot idea came to Europe from the Chinese foot binding tradition.
Oh, that is so interesting. So what's different about kind of the traditional, the original Cinderella as opposed to one we tend to think of in the Western world?
In the original one, which my memory is a little foggy, but I know that she met a fish. Like a fish jumped out of the lake, and it was a magical fish, and that was kind of the fairy godmother in the story, that somehow was able to get her to the ball. It probably wasn't called a ball, but she did go off and meet the prince, and she did lose her slipper, and he had to find her using the slipper. So it has a lot of similarities.
That gives a very different connotation to the smallest, most delicate.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
I should go read that story again. It's been so long.
So, if Cinderella was the inspiration for the first book, your second book, Scarlet, safe to say a different fairy tale is taking center stage?
Yes, Scarlet will be based on Little Red Riding Hood. Book 3, Crest, is based on Rapunzel, and Winter is based on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Now, are you looking at kind of the original stories behind the fairy tales kind of as inspiration for these, or is it just...
Yeah, I would say that I take inspiration both from the Grimm tales, and also, just bits and pieces that you hear. Like Scarlet, for example, is set in France. And the reason for that is because I don't know if it's true, but I heard at one point that, in France, hundreds of years ago, there was a bunch of murders took place, and people at the time believed that it was a werewolf doing the killing. And so there was this big hunt to find the werewolf, and that could have played a role in the origin of the Little Red Riding Hood story. So I don't know if that's true, but that was what gave me the idea to set it in France. So there's, a lot of little tidbits that I've got like that I've used in the book.
So are there going to be murders then in this upcoming book?
I'm not telling you that. It will be exciting.
Now, will Cinder still be a main character, or will she be, in jail for most of the story, and as other characters take center stage?
Cinder is a main character. She is the hero of the whole series. And I don't really want to give away what's going to happen to her, but there will be much more Cinder and much more Kai.
Excellent. Now, will these books it's still very much fairy tale oriented, or maybe lean a little bit more towards sci-fi paradigms?
I would say that they lean more towards science fiction. The series, it's really taken on such a mind of its own, and you still have the inspiration of the fairy tales, and I try to drop in little fun hints. In Cinder, you have the car being the pumpkin carriage, and so little things like that. I try to keep that up throughout the whole series, but it really has just kind of exploded into its entirely own story.
Do you have any, you said originally you started the series came from looking at your favorite sci-fi tropes. Can you tell me what some of your favorite sci-fi tropes are?
Sexy spaceship captains. And Jessica is one.
Is his name Mal?
No.
Was it perhaps inspired by the Joss Whedon character?
Like a Mal
Oh, the roguish space captain. I see how you're putting down. I like it. Now, you must be a Joss Whedon fan then.
I love Joss Whedon.
Were you also a Buffy fan?
Not really.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's not because I wouldn't have loved it if I hadn't watched it. I just didn't watch it. I didn't have anyone telling me go watch the show, so I didn't know about it. I knew about it, but I'd never really seen it until recently.
You seem to have a soft spot for the sci-fi westerns with Cowboy Bebop and Firefly.
True.
Any others?
Also space operas.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Well, have you read any good space operas or space cowboy stories recently?
I really love Beth Revis's series Across the Universe. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of space opera in YA, at least. You definitely have lots of dystopian. But space opera, I think, is something that's still kind of coming into its own.
Have you ever read Elizabeth Moon?
No.
She's a big sci-fi space opera author. I'd be interested to see what you think of her.
Elizabeth Moon.
Elizabeth Moon. She's a big one. Now I have to ask, from Cinder, how much fun was Iko to write?
I love Iko. I had no idea. When I was drafting it out and plotting out the book, Iko was just a character. She had some important things to accomplish plot-wise. I didn't expect her to be interesting or fun or anything. And then she would roll into these scenes and just say these completely wacky, off-the-wall things that no android should be saying. And she was so much fun. I absolutely love her.
Is she going to continue? Will we see more of her in the second book? Oh, look at playing KG. Is there anything you can tease about the second book?
I can tease that you will meet two. In addition to meeting Scarlet, who's very spicy and spunky and a lot of fun also, you also will meet two new heroes, one being the sexy spaceship captain.
Oh, yes.
And one, I hesitate to call him a hero, but you will meet Wolf, who is a street fighter who crosses paths with Scarlet and may or may not be up to no good.
Well, with a name like Wolf. Is he big and bad?
Well, yeah.
Excellent. So we have Scarlet coming out next year, and what's the timeline for the rest of the series?
They should be out about a year apart.
Have you finished writing them all, or where are you in the process?
I have written drafts of books 3 and 4 already, and I'm currently maybe 3/4 of the way through revisions on book 3.
So you're hip deep in the series still, and when Cinder series is done, have you any thoughts about what you work on next? Maybe write that space opera? Maybe.
I have many, many ideas. There's a good chance that the next book or series will have more of a fantasy element. I'm going to kind of go back to my roots, because that's what I was so in love with when I was a teenager. But I have ideas for fantasies and contemporaries and thrillers and really everything, so we'll see.
Is there any other fairy tale? You've got 4 fairy tales covered with this series. Is there any other fairy tale next that you'd like to take a stab at?
There are a couple of fairy tales. I would really love to do something with Bluebeard.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is an underrepresented fairy tale, and one of my favorites, which is weird because it's so gory. Yeah, I don't know, maybe someday.
Well, another evil, good-looking evil rake in your future, perhaps?
Yes, perhaps so.
All right, Marissa, well, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your ALA.